Hello, and welcome to the first segment of something we're calling a PREVNet Research Explainer. My name's Megan, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming at you today from the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, and homeland of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I'm joined today by Dr. Liz Baker, and we're here to talk about teen dating violence. Now, teen dating violence is obviously not a happy topic, but it's an important one. The research suggests that it's not all that uncommon among teens, and we know that it can have really negative impacts on young people's health and development. So that's why we've called in Liz, who's a researcher at the University of Calgary, to chat with us about a recent study that can help us understand dating violence and how to prevent and address it. So, with that, I will throw to you, Liz, to give me a bit of an intro about yourself and your work in this field.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, as was mentioned, my name is Liz. Pronouns are she, her, and I am actually calling in from the same land as Megan mentioned in Mohkinstsis. And my professional background is in experimental psychology. And so I received my PhD from Kent State University in Ohio in the States, and received a lot of kind of formal training for the rigorous how do we do science in the white ivory tower. And it was wonderful in a lot of ways, but also just, I think, felt frustrated with a lack of disconnect with the actual communities that we were hoping to serve. And so moved up to Canada at the University of Calgary to get more of an experience in school-based and community-based research. And since then have just been involved with a lot of various projects related to youth violence prevention. So both dating violence prevention as well as bullying prevention, and trying to come at it from the lens of listening to what the community needs and then doing work that maps onto that.
Great. It sounds like we're in the hands of a professional today. And we're here to talk a bit about a recent study that was published by Liz and members of the PREVNet team. And it has some really interesting takeaways about factors that may shape teens' dating experiences and the likelihood that they will experience or commit dating violence. I think it's important when we talk about dating violence to talk about what that actually means. People have a bit of an idea in their mind of what dating violence might look like, but it sounds like from the paper, it can take a lot of different forms. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about those.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of times when we're talking about teen dating violence, we talk about the different types of psychological, cyber, physical, and sexual. So psychological aggression is kind of referring to things like emotional and verbal aggression. So saying something to insult your partner, or maybe controlling what they wear or what they say. Cyber aggression is something that happens specifically online. So that may be something that is done through social media, or it could be through text messages. Physical aggression refers to exactly what it sounds like. So hitting, slapping, kicking one's partner. And then sexual aggression as well can have a variety of forms, but examples could be unwanted touching, unwanted sexual overtones in the context of the relationship. And so these are just ways that we help to think about the different forms it may take, what it may look like when we're working with youth. But we also know that there are overlap between the types. So it's not so much that someone's in a dating relationship and they're experiencing dating violence and it's only one of these types. It may be a few different ones, and we'll kind of get into that later, I'm sure, with the paper.
Totally. And speaking of the paper, the paper that we're talking about today is called Canadian Adolescents' Experiences of Dating Violence, Associations with Social Power Imbalances. And so you co-authored this paper with Dr. Exner-Cortens and Dr. Craig, and it talks about power, which is a term that a lot of us use every day, but it can mean a lot of different things, I think. So in this study, what are we talking about when we talk about power and power imbalances?
Yeah, so complex question, complex answer. So power can have a lot of different definitions, but I think if we want to maybe think about it simply, it's like the ability to have some type of control over something. And in the context of relationships, that can take different forms. So when we think about bullying, there is always some type of power imbalance that exists. So if you think about maybe like a stereotypical, oh, a kid who is older and larger is bullying another kid who is younger and smaller. And so the power difference comes in the size difference and the age difference between those two people. But a lot of the power that is talked about in the paper comes from social power. So, social power meaning, how does society treat you based on your various social identities? So, social identities can include, but is not limited to, things like your gender, your religion, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation. And we live in a world that puts more value on some identities as compared to others. So, oftentimes across Canada, what has been valued: cisgender white men who do not have disabilities and have a higher socioeconomic status. So, in general, we've seen that those types of people tend to have more social power as compared to people falling into other groups. And so the other groups would be those who have experienced oppression. And so we can think about cisgender women, non binary folks, transgender women, and people who have gender identities not included in those as well, those who do not identify as heterosexual. Those who have disabilities. So these are just a few examples, but a lot of different systems of oppression that just basically say you're lesser than, though that is, of course, not true. That's what we've been taught. And that's what we're trying to talk a little bit more about. So the power that comes from that is really, where are you sitting in society based on your social identities? And then to make it even more complex, we all have multiple identities. So intersectionality, a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw and others, really referring to everyone has a unique experience based on the combination of their identities. So my experience of oppression as a cisgender white woman is a lot different as compared to someone who is a cisgender Black woman. So knowing that that person would experience both the complexities of being a woman and also being Black and the racism that comes with it. So it's a very complex topic, but really what it boils down to is what areas of your social identity do you hold power and privilege, and which ones do you experience oppression with, and how does that impact your amount of power as compared to the person next to you?
That's really, really helpful context. And why do you think power is important to understand in the context of youth relationships?
So, power is something that kids learn about from an early age, as early as two. Kids are learning from a lot of different environments. It starts in the home, and they see power as a way to get what you want. And we can use power in good ways and we can use power in bad ways. But what's relevant here in relationships is that oftentimes kids learn by observing how they use power in a negative way to get what they want. So, using your size, intimidating someone, name calling to make someone feel lesser just to get what you want. And it's not that kids are bad when they're young, they're just smart and they're observing and they're saying, okay, maybe I saw some adults at the park doing this type of behavior. I'm going to give it a go. Oh, I see that it's really effective. I'm going to keep doing that. And so, of course, they will continue on that trajectory unless there's someone who intervenes and says, hey, you know what? Yeah, that's effective, but it's also harmful. Here's a way to use power in a good way, and let's teach more healthy ways of interacting. And so power is something that kids learn first in the home. Then they learn it with friends and in the school environment, transfers to peer relationships. And then if those youth go on to then have dating, romantic, sexual relationships, transfers theirs as well.
Hmm. And in this study, what indicators were chosen to sort of speak to power imbalances and access to power among the young people sampled?
Yeah. So we used indicators that already existed. So the data from this study came from like an existing set. So it's not what we created for a survey, but it was what we found. And so, as a few examples, we had gender. So we wanted to look at that. As I mentioned before, cisgender boys compared to anyone else tend to have more power. In our study, we weren't able to look at many different genders because of low sample sizes. So it did boil down to cisgender boys and girls. We also looked at ethnicity, immigration status, family structure, family affluence, and food insecurity. And although these are not actual measures of, hey, have you experienced depression? We're seeing them as proxies for them. So, in an ideal world, it would be really awesome to have a study where we could somehow tap into each individual kiddo's experience of what they're going through every day. But we're trying to look at that and making some assumptions for, like, okay, for gender, if you are identifying as a girl, then let's think about maybe how systems of repression of sexism are impacting these different patterns.
And it looked like it was a pretty big sample size for this study. I think it was a secondary analysis of a data set of over 20,000 young people. And then you selected specifically for those in the ninth and 10th grade with recent dating experience. So, can you give me a quick sort of overview about the question you were hoping to answer in looking at this data?
Yeah, sure. So we had a few different aims. The first one was to just look at patterns that existed when it comes to dating violence. So, as I mentioned before, there are different types of dating violence. So, in this study, we looked at psychological, cyber, and physical. Um, but it's not as simple as these kids are doing physical violence, these kids are experiencing psychological, whatever it might be. And so what we wanted to do was use a cool analysis. It's called a latent class analysis. But the only thing you really need to know is it helps us identify like what groups might exist to help us explain what these kids' experiences are. So is there a subgroup of kids that are using all types of violence and experiencing all types of violence? Are there some kiddos that aren't involved at all? And there's some research to show that we do have certain types of subgroups of kids that we think are going to emerge based on past research. But this was our first time being able to answer that question in a nationally representative sample across Canada. So the first thing we wanted to do was just look at what patterns of use of violence in people's dating relationships exist. And then we wanted to say, okay, once we know what those subgroups are, how is that related to kids' use of bullying? So, like I said before, power dynamics in dating violence, power dynamics in bullying. What is the relationship between the two? And then the third part was really saying, okay, take it one step further and look at social marginalization. So the same indicators: gender, race, immigration status, family structure, family affluence, food insecurity. How is that impacting the way in which kids are using power? So a lot going on in that study, but those are kind of the three main things we wanted to look at.
Right. And it looked like you had a few hypotheses about, or hypotheses about who might fall into which class in terms of patterns of dating violence. Were there any findings that surprised you?
Yeah, so I know that there was one class that we thought was going to emerge that did not, a group related to perpetration. Um, and so we didn't see a group that was reporting a lot of perpetration of dating violence. And we think that's probably something to do with the age group, that that's something that emerges a little bit later, and our sample was a little bit younger. But we were not surprised that there's a small amount of kiddos that were what we call uninvolved, so just not reporting either perpetration or victimization. And then we had a class that were reporting mostly victimization when it comes to psychological and cyber dating violence. And then that there is a group that we've seen through other research studies as well, which we call mutual violence. And that's a term that is a bit tricky because different people use it in different contexts. But in this study, we're really just trying to say that there were kids that were both using and experiencing all types of violence. So we saw, yeah, 3 groups emerging for this study.
Great. And so I'm wondering, not really knowing how to interpret that information, would the fact that there's a mutual violence class and no perpetration only class, would that indicate that it's more likely that young people will be in relationships where there's mutual violence rather than one perpetrator, one victim, or would that be a stretch?
No, I think that's fair to say. And I think what we see is like developmentally, when people are younger, oftentimes it is that there is both the perpetration and victimization in the relationships. And sometimes what happens is that those who continue to use violence throughout the course of their life, we're more likely to see those patterns of perpetration only in adulthood when it comes to severe domestic violence. So, yeah, I think that would be a fair conclusion.
Another interesting finding was that both perpetrating bullying and being a victim of bullying were associated with being part of the mutual violence and the psychological or cyber victimization classes or patterns of dating violence. What do you think are some of the implications there?
Yeah, I think a major take home message for that is something we talked about briefly before, that people who are using power in negative ways in one context are doing it in the other context as well. So when we see it first happening in peer relationships with bullying, we are also going to expect to see that in dating relationships. So it's the same thing of, hey, this is something that works for me, it's effective, I'm doing it in my friendships, why wouldn't I also do it in other relationships as well? So it seems to be this common thread. And there are other studies to support that as well, that are longitudinal and show these trajectories of bullying in younger ages than those same kiddos going on and using dating violence in adolescence.
Okay, so it sounds like this is a really sort of important time to be intervening on bullying and
Hmm.
interpersonal violence then.
Absolutely. Intervene early, intervene often. If we can teach kids about healthy ways to interact with one another when they are young, as early as 2 years old, talking about sharing with their siblings or their friends, and making sure that we're paying attention to this in schools when we see it emerging in early childhood, that can set them on the right path to then have more healthy relationships when they enter puberty and start dating and having sexual relationships as well.
And in terms of social marginalization and that piece of this study, what did we learn about how risk of social marginalization is associated with patterns of dating violence?
Yeah, so a lot of individual findings. We won't get into all of those. But another, I think, take home message is that when people are experiencing oppression in their lives for various reasons related to their social identities, we see that they are more likely to be involved with violence. And we have to be really mindful of kind of like the messaging and the packaging here, because although we don't know for sure from this study, what we're thinking is happening is that these people are being kind of robbed of power in their daily lives. And sometimes when that happens, we look to find powers in other ways. And so if you are feeling this lack of power because of oppression in society and what's happening on a day to day basis, you may then try and reclaim some of that in other areas of your life. For example, in friendships or in romantic relationships. So it's not that, oh, the the girls that are doing this, or it's the kids that are experiencing food insecurity, and we need to see that like as problematic. It's quite the opposite. It's, we need to understand the systems of oppression that are impacting them in these ways where they would be more likely to be involved in the violence.
Yeah, and I think that was one important takeaway that I took reading this is that we're always taught that violence begets violence, and I think you can really see that in the data of this study that structural and systemic violence and interpersonal violence, they all impact people's likelihood of experiencing dating violence and perpetrating dating violence. And I'm wondering if there's that's just what I took away as sort of a layperson to all of this. In terms of someone who maybe works directly with youth, maybe like a counselor or a teacher, is there anything that you hope they might take away from the study?
Yeah, well, I think they could probably draw on what you said of like, we really need to have an empathetic understanding of each of the kids that we're working with. So when you're working with someone, think to yourself, what is their experience on a daily basis? Of course, you won't never know until you ask. And even if you ask, you're not going to know 100%. But having an understanding of what systems of oppression may be impacting their lives and what can I do to support them through that? What can I do to help them gain power in ways that are really amazing and helpful? So, for example, maybe if there's a kid who is experiencing bullying because of their race, and you see how that's negatively impacting them. Of course, giving them the supports that they need to work through that, but also working with them to see, are there opportunities for them to have power in the school in different ways? So maybe there's a leadership role, maybe there's a sports team, maybe there are other ways you could think of getting them involved in clubs so that they can reclaim that power in a way that's really helpful. And then they go on to be role models for other kids that may have similar experiences to teach them those ways. So I think, yeah, it's empathy and it's action at the same time.
Great. And I think that might be a really great place to, if you want to, maybe plug some resources for educators or people working with youth who are interested in learning more about how to intervene on interpersonal violence. Where could they find information about that?
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot of resources on just our page. So it's www.prevnet.ca. And probably most relevant to this work would be a new online learning series that's specifically for educators to help them learn about bullying and what they can do to prevent and respond to it. And that really gives a good kind of basis of understanding of how do kids grow to develop and understand the use of power, and how is it related to systems of oppression? And then you as an adult, how can you work with them and create spaces in schools that are going to fight against that oppression and to support them in good ways? And so that's really focused more so on bullying, but it also in that course talks a little bit about how it then transfers to teen dating violence. And then we have an up and coming course of how to actually respond to kids when they tell you that they think they are experiencing dating violence in their relationship. So that'll be up on the website soon. It's under trainings, but it's all free. It's all online. It's all on your own time. And we offer certificates for it as well. So definitely check it out.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure to link that in the description as well. I think those were all the questions that I had for you today. So thank you so much, Liz, for taking the time to chat. And I learned a lot, and I'm sure all of our listeners will as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
This broadcast was brought to you by the Promoting Relationships and Eliminating Violence Network, also known as PREVNet. PREVNet is a national not-for-profit organization dedicated to preventing youth interpersonal violence. PREVNet collaborates with communities, organizations, educators, researchers, and youth to create and share learning resources that address bullying and teen dating violence across Canada. For more information about how you can get involved in eliminating violence and promoting relationships among youth, visit prevnet.ca.